All right. Hello and welcome to today's live stream from Hitchhikers to Habitat Changers, aquatic invasive species in the Connecticut River. My name is Amanda Major and I'm the Outreach and Events Coordinator at the Connecticut River Conservancy. Today we're excited to learn more about aquatic invasives in our watershed. We'll find out how they're reshaping our rivers and water bodies across the region, develop an understanding of how to recognize them, hear about how and why they spread, and learn about the short and long-term impacts they have on our ecosystem. We'll also cover some practical ways you can get involved. Before we start, I want to share a few key reminders. Please keep your mic on mute during the presentations so our speakers can be heard without distractions. We love and encourage your questions. Please type them into the chat box in the lower portion of your screen. We'll save time at the end to answer as many as possible. As always, feel free to depart whenever is best for you. We're recording the episode and we'll post it on our YouTube channel, where you can also view recordings of past live streams. And finally, I'll be sending out an email later today with a link to the recording, some follow-up resources, and other ways you can stay connected to CRC's current work. Now, let's welcome our speakers. Our first speaker is Kelly Beerman, CRC's Aquatic Invasive Species Program Manager. Kelly directs, coordinates, and executes CRC's work regarding hydrilla, water chestnut, and all aquatic invasives throughout the Connecticut River watershed. Kelly is busy. This includes facilitating our current community education and outreach initiatives, as well as designing and implementing future projects. Kelly is particularly interested in collaborating with local river and lake communities within the watershed. Our next two speakers, Toni Stewart and Jim Straub, work at the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation. Toni Stewart is a water resource scientist with DCR's Lakes and Ponds program. Her 10-year career spans private sector lake management, 5 years in the classroom, and 2 years managing public water resources for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Jim Straub is an aquatic biologist with DCR's Lakes and Ponds program. With 28 years of experience on Massachusetts lakes and ponds, Jim brings deep expertise and an unmatched knowledge of the state's public waters to his work. We're so thrilled about this awesome speaker lineup today. Now let's get into it. Take it away, Kelly.
Great. Thanks, Amanda. And thanks everybody for being here today. I see a lot of you in the chat, and I know some of you, so it's good to see you on Zoom. So I'm going to kick us off. I'm going to go kind of broad at first and do some review maybe for some of you. Some of these things you might know, you might not know. And then I'm going to narrow it down to what CRC has been doing and some of the ways that you can support our work. So aquatic invasive species, why do they matter? Their impacts are pretty costly in a lot of different ways. And like I said, some of you probably know some of these ways already, have experienced them firsthand. And not just ecologically, but also socially and economically. But ecologically, of course, a lot of these things are familiar. Invasive species can outcompete native plants, animals, they reduce biodiversity, they change habitat structure, alter food webs. They can also negatively impact water quality. Over time, this can fundamentally change how water bodies function. And from a recreation standpoint, dense plant growth can also interfere with boating, fishing, swimming, and paddling. If your motorboat propeller has ever been caught in a thick mat of plant, like you see here with the hydrilla, or if you've been boating and you come across a thick mat of water chestnut, like you see there on the bottom, that makes recreation in a lot of the places we like to enjoy pretty difficult. And I know some of us have definitely experienced that firsthand. Commercially and economically, the cost for managing aquatic invasive species really does add up. And communities and organizations spend a significant amount of money each year on management and monitoring activities. And invasive species can also reduce property values, affect tourism, and increase maintenance costs for infrastructure like dams and water intakes. So just to give you an idea of what some of those costs could be, it's estimated annually in the US about $120 billion is spent on aquatic invasive species. Um, on a state level, we can use Vermont as an example. Vermont estimates about $2 million is spent annually on various management activities. And then, and I'm sure some of you have also experienced on more of the local level, the town level, lake associations, there's not unheard of to spend about 10,000 to 50,000 per year, depending on the management activity for a single species in a single water body. So those costs really do add up, and that is a huge impact overall for what you can do capacity wise too. Um, so these impacts of aquatic invasive species aren't just the ecological damage they cause, they affect the overall use and the value of our waters. So next slide. So I'm just going to also take us back a little bit and review some terminology. I always find this really helpful to kind of center myself on like, what are these species? So we're going to clarify some terminology here. So not all nuisance species are invasive. So nuisance species, like I have up here, mosquitoes, poison ivy, that is not hydrilla, that is Elodia canadensis, that's a common waterweed. Are all examples of native species, but they are a nuisance. And then we have exotic non-native species that occur outside their natural range. And then many non-native species, they don't cause the level of harm that invasive species do, and they fit in pretty quietly and comfortably with their new habitat. So we have tulips, there's a monk parakeet, apples are examples of exotic non-native species. So when you have those two things together, a nuisance and in a non-native species, that's when you get to the invasive species level. So that's the intersection of those two categories. And then we get to that level of ecological, economic, human health, that kind of level of harm. And invasive species tend to spread aggressively. They lack natural predators and they disrupt the systems they're introduced to. So that's kind of the distinction that I like folks to kind of set their mind on when we're going into talks about invasive species. And that distinction matters in terms of like the levels of management and how much money and all of that stuff that we consider. As we go along. Next slide, please. So aquatic invasive species, aka AIS, you'll hear that acronym a lot throughout this presentation and just in general. And if you're familiar with aquatic invasive species, you may even use that acronym. So you're going to hear me say it. You'll probably hear Toni and Jim say it as well. It's a complex issue, and this slide highlights just some of those complexities. There is no one size fits all solution in how we address this issue, and I think it's really important that we remember that as we go and talk about like the ways that people can support or engage with this issue. So first, AAS comes in many forms: plants, animals, even pathogens, and they live in different ways. So aquatic plants, for example, can be floating on the surface, they can be fully submerged, they can be emergent. And their spread and growth depends on many factors as well. So their biology, how they reproduce, the water temperature, water flow, nutrient levels, where they already exist in the watershed. And, species may be manageable in one water body, but they could explode in another or be just downstream in the river and making management incredibly difficult. So it really just depends on the environment in which they are in as well. And of course, humans play a huge role in the spread of AIS. So common pathways include ballast discharge, aquarium dumping, illegal fish stocking, and the big one, overland transport on boats and trailers, and even in-home gardening. So there's all these different vectors in which AIS is getting spread throughout a water body as well, and not to mention the non-human ways as well. So because of this complexity, management strategies range wildly, from prevention and education to hand pulling to mechanical to chemical control, and priorities depend on the species, the location, and available resources. Next slide, please. All right, so I'm going to narrow it down a little bit more now. So let's talk about AIS in the Connecticut River watershed. So we'll take these concepts and apply it to the watershed. There are currently more than 40 plant and animal aquatic invasive species that threaten the Connecticut River watershed. There's definitely more than 40. Um, it's a significant number still, especially when you consider how interconnected this system is, considering its huge geography, 410-mile river with 7.2 million acres in the watershed, and the number of species found within it. Addressing aquatic invasive species is a massive puzzle where all the pieces spread across a network of people and organizations. So you probably, if you know me, you might have heard this puzzle analogy before. I really do like to use it because it's kind of what I picture in my brain when I think about AAS across an entire watershed as large as the Connecticut River watershed. Um, so this large network is made up of organizations, agencies, nonprofits, municipalities, researchers, volunteers, and a lot of other individuals all working on these different pieces to solve different problems and also the overall issue as well. The Connecticut River Conservancy, CRC, plays a significant role in this network. So CRC focuses on a watershed-wide coordination, community engagement, monitoring, and hands-on management, especially where there's collaboration across state lines. And that is essential when you're thinking about a watershed context. So the key takeaway here is there's no single organization that can solve the AIS issues that we're having in the watershed alone. The success really depends on partnerships and shared effort, and CRC supports communities and partnerships to connect on these solutions throughout the watershed. Next slide, please. All right, so I'm going to narrow it down even more, and I'm going to use a species as an example of what some of the things CRC is doing and how we address the level of complexity with some of these species. So water chestnut is one of the more well-known and very visible aquatic invasive plants in our region. It is a rooted, floated annual plant, a native to Europe, and it forms those really thick, dense mats on the water surface. I know many of you in the chat are very familiar with this species. And these mats can block sunlight, reduce oxygen levels, crowd out native vegetation, and of course, make it really difficult to enjoy a water body if you're trying to boat or fish. And it was introduced in the late 1800s, and from there it escaped cultivation and eventually spread throughout the East Coast. So in the Connecticut River watershed, water chestnut is a widespread and persistent. And one of the biggest challenges is its spiny seeds, which can remain viable in sediment for many, many years. So that makes long-term monitoring and management of this species automatically necessary. So this species is a good example of how a single introduction can have long-lasting effects. And it also just so happens to be the species that CRC currently is working on the most. So let's talk about that. So next slide, please. So we can see just how extensive the water chestnut issue is in with our watershed. You can kind of see from my map there. This map is also on our website if you wanted to go and explore it. There are, on this particular map, there are over 125 known water chestnut sites throughout the Connecticut River watershed. It's showing all 4 states there had to cut it off to fit it in, but Connecticut, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire. These are just the ones that are on this map. I am sure there are more that will eventually end up on this map as well. So all of these sites receive some level of monitoring and management, which is a huge undertaking. And CRC is a portion of this, but individuals and other organizations are the other portion. And that level of management can be as little as just having this a spot mapped on this map. All the way to sites that have multiple organizations and multiple management strategies being applied to it. And some locations are small and manageable with volunteers. Others require intensive, long-term, and professional support. So this really emphasizes why coordination matters throughout the watershed. Without the constant monitoring and follow-up, these populations can spread even more or rebound quickly, even after years of work. Next slide, please. So this slide is really getting into like what CRC is doing and what the management strategy is here with our program. So knowing all we know about water chestnut and where it is in the watershed, a major component of our program is volunteer hand pulling events. These are incredibly effective for early stage and moderate infestations and also can serve as a powerful way to connect people to the river. And we don't just focus on the hand pulling at these events, we also provide information about AIS in general, boater safety and responsibility, including the Clean Drain Dry initiative, and important information about the local water body that we're working in the context of the entire watershed. So we also provide boats to community members that may not necessarily have them already to ensure that they have access to participation in a program like this. CRC coordinates regular site monitoring and information, data sharing, close collaboration with partners like state agencies, towns, and other nonprofits, in addition to these volunteer hand pulling. So it's kind of like a big package program that we're trying to work towards. And the education awareness piece is just as important as the physical removal of this plant, helping people recognize the species, understand pathways of spread, and how to get involved builds long-term stewardship for within our watershed. And I feel like that is such an important part of this program. Um, and CRC is just one of the watershed-wide nonprofits doing this work with the dual goal of reducing the water chestnut impacts and also strengthening community connections to the river. Next slide, please. So I'm very quickly going to do a small spotlight on hydrilla. I know Toni and Jim have some more things to say about hydrilla, but it is also, if you go to our website, you'll notice that water chestnut and then also hydrilla is kind of highlighted there. And it was first found in the river in 2016. Surveys conducted in the Connecticut by the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station identified populations between Agawam, Massachusetts, and Essex, Connecticut, and it forms this, really dense mat, spreads rapidly through fragments. So even small pieces can establish new populations. So that's a little bit different than the water chestnut. And so some different management strategies have to be applied here. And therefore, different organizations with different resources and abilities and capacities have kind of a different set of ways they go about it. So CRC doesn't manage or have a program in this for hydrilla in the same way that it does for water chestnut, but it does work with other organizations that do actively manage hydrilla. So early detection, rapid response is critical here, just like for any other species, because once it becomes widespread, management becomes much more expensive and less effective. And so, like I said, CRC works with organizations to support projects on research and surveys and management. We do this through collaborative information sharing and keeping concerned community members informed about the status within the watershed, and also connecting them to the resources and information about the active management projects. Like the Army Corps of Engineers hydrilla project. So we are also expanding our program to start a new project in Vermont and New Hampshire, with the support of the Vermont Department of Conservation and the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. So we are going to be doing some surveys along the main stem of the Connecticut. Hydrilla has not reached that far north yet, but it is important to survey so that in case it does go that far north, we can catch it early and we can apply some early management to any kind of smaller infestation. So we will be supporting surveys in the northern part of the watershed this year for that. Okay, next slide. All right. This slide goes against all of my PowerPoint building criteria. It is very chaotic. And for those of you who are like, why did you do this? I did it to make a point, because it's intentionally chaotic for a reason because all these logos represent just a small portion of the organizations that are working on this issue. If I went and spent hours pulling all the logos for all of the organizations, locally, state level, federal, we would have multiple slides of these logos. This is just to kind of show you the small portion of folks that are working on this, and many of these CRC is working with directly around some of the things I had mentioned. And and these also certainly don't illustrate all of the partners that we work with too. So sorry, folks, if I left you off off the slide. I ran out of room, but I think I made my point by adding all of these. But as you can see, there are many ways to get involved with CRC. So by attending events like these, not just the AIS events, because it's all interconnected, right? All the health of our watershed is all connected together. So continuing to attend events and be involved in that way, virtual or in person, coming to join a hand pull. We will start posting hand pull events sometime. They should all be up there in May. So keep checking back with our website, sign up for our newsletters to get an idea of when those will be and when you can sign up for those. They're primarily in Connecticut and Massachusetts. And you could also talk to me about volunteering, how you can volunteer to monitor a site. So that map I showed you, there's some sites that just don't get a lot of attention because there's just not enough people to go out and take a look at what's going on. So if you are interested in that kind of work, come talk to me and I can see how I can get you hooked up with either an organization that's nearby or just, let you know how you could do that. You could donate, as we talked about the finances of this issue, it's a lot. And CRC does spend a lot of money to support these programs. If you can't help out in other ways, but if you have the means, donating certainly supports this work. And donating to any of these other organizations too will support the work. You can apply to be a seasonal staff member. We're just wrapping up our process now, but if you're ever interested in working for CRC on this issue, you please do apply in future years. So yeah, beyond CRC, these are some of the example of organizations, but prevention is the most effective, least costly tool we have for this, and it relies heavily on informed and engaged community members like you. So you can also engage by just cleaning your boats and spreading the word about this information to neighbors or community members that aren't maybe not as informed or had no idea. You could, if you see something, if you're an avid boater and you see something weird, you could report what you see to state folks. I'm sure Toni and Jim will be talking more about that. You can attend a weed watcher workshop in your state. I know Toni and Jim will be talking more about that. And you can just find out what your local organizations or towns are doing and just get on board with it. So if you have the time, expertise, or just awareness to share, there is a role for everyone in this issue. So with that in mind, and the brief highlight of CRC's role in all of this, we're going to shift gears now and hear more from Toni and Jim about the AIS management activities handled at the state level and how that works.
Thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you for having us. Today, I'm going to introduce you to the DCR Lakes and Ponds program and talk about some of the work we do. And then later on, Jim's going to take over and talk about some of the projects we're working on that are involved with AIS. So we are the Lakes and Ponds program. We are a small but mighty group, but as you can see, it's comprised of myself, Jim, Kara, and Tom, who are not here today. We're based out of the Office of Water Resources, but we try to cover the whole state with just the four of us. So, next slide. So our program focuses on protecting and improving public lakes and ponds across the state. We kind of have like 4 categories of work that we divide amongst ourselves. And the first we do is monitoring and assessing lakes, including water quality, ecology, invasive species, and impacts to stormwater and erosion. We also protect and restore lakes through hands-on projects that improve both ecosystem and health and recreation. We collaborate with partners, regional, state, federal agencies on AIS and lake management guidance. And lastly, and most importantly, we educate and advise the public through outreach, trainings, and resources that we offer through requests. Because we're such a small team, it's really important that we use this piece of what we do to gain more eyes on the water. Because we cover about 180 DCR water bodies and we contribute to work across more than 3,500 across the state. So the more people we have trained and looking and reporting on things, the better. Next slide. So a lot of what goes on behind the scenes to keep lakes healthy is what we do on a day-to-day basis. So we conduct plant and AIS species surveys by boat and sometimes seasonally by diving. We also have boat ramp monitors tracking potential spread at some of our select lakes, and we also have them give out resources and help clean boats before they enter and exit the water bodies, and they also collect data by asking for voluntary participation in our boat ramp monitor survey. Like I mentioned before, education is a big part of what we do, so we often help people understand how to be good lake stewards, and so we do that by meeting with lake associations, and we also offer our weed watcher training class that I'll talk more about in a bit. We also help with physical improvements like beach replacements and stormwater and erosion control at our state parks and public waters. And we also monitor water quality, including cyanobacteria, bacteria source tracking to make sure our lakes are safe for recreating. Next slide, please. So one of our most effective education tools is our Weed Watcher training program. As Kelly had mentioned previously, early detection is really critical. It's much easier and less expensive to manage invasive species when they're caught early. So in this training, we train volunteers on how to identify aquatic plants using our guides, which are basically just a more user-friendly version of a dichotomous key. We show the most common invasive species and how you can report invasives when you think you've spotted one so that we can track and manage the spread of these species across the state. This greatly expands our reach. There's absolutely no way our staff alone could monitor this many water bodies, so it's really, really important that we have volunteers like everyone here today that help us with this work. And then the trainings are free and they're offered seasonally all throughout Massachusetts. We bring all the plants and resources needed to conduct the training. All you need to do is provide a public space if you want to host one. Typically, we don't start before the last week of May, and we can go up until about the beginning of October. It really depends on if the plants are growing and if they're still there or if they're dying back, because half the class is hands-on, and we actually have you look at live specimens and use our guides to try and ID the plants in front of you with our help. Next slide, please. And I think Jim's going to take over here.
Okay. Thank you very much, Toni, and thank you, Kelly. I want to thank everybody for attending this, because actually you guys are really working for us, and we're going to get into that also. So here's some of the big special projects, and DCR does from the very, very big to a very, very small projects, and mostly using both volunteers, the public, and also hire companies. So we have one big project on the Nashua River where we're actually herbiciding water chestnut, because there are acres and acres of it. We hope that once it gets to a manageable position or a manageable size, we'll be able to get in there and hand pull. But as many of you volunteers will probably are nodding, and I saw in some of Kelly's unfortunate pictures, hand pulling 30 acres of water chestnut is never, never fun. Otis Reservoir is one of the things that we're doing. Otis Reservoir in Tallinn, Mass. has just introduced variable water milfoil. We actually have divers in there selectively hand pulling this out because it is at a small amount that it isn't worth herbiciding, and it's small enough that we can attack it, getting in there 2 or 3 times a year and hand pulling. Zebra mussels. Those of you who have heard about the zebra mussels, they're in a few lakes in the western region. We have a boat wash station and an inspection station. Some of the lakes that are susceptible to zebra mussels don't have them yet, but we are trying to keep those out. And we will be having 7 boat ramp monitors this summer protecting those lakes. And then finally, hydrilla on the Connecticut River. Hydrilla is, and you can kind of see I'm not supposed to mention company's name, so you can see the amusement park ride in the background that could be on the Connecticut River south by Connecticut. So that's where the location of this is. That's the northernmost point that we have. And here's some of the signs that you could see at our boat ramp. Next slide, please. At boat ramps throughout the Connecticut River in Massachusetts. So the hard thing about hydrilla is that it has a native plant that behaves very good. It's a good structure for fish. It adds oxygen and it doesn't reproduce as rapidly like hydrilla. And those of you who are looking at this, you're like, oh, great, something green in the water that looks like something, and I'm not supposed to know. Well, the top one has 5 leaves at a point, and the bottom one has 3 leaves at a point. And these are the type of things that you will learn at a weed watcher class with us, because we bring the natives and the non-natives and their lookalikes. And we're like, well, this is what you want to look out for. This is what you don't want to hand pull. You don't want to disturb, because this is a native plant. But hydrilla was discovered in 2016. We found it in a pretty good patch. We are working with some state and federal agencies to try to get it out of the northernmost Connecticut point in the river there. This summer and next summer, we hope to be doing tributary surveys, which many of you who are listening in here will be our minions for us, unpaid volunteers, as they say. But that's what we want. We know that you guys are out into the watershed, and we're hoping that through a weed watchers class and through some other trainings, you will be our eyes and ears on the water bodies in that region. And at the end of this presentation, you're going to see some contact information and some identifying websites that you can go and identify stuff. But mainly, we just want you guys to be our eyes and ears on the water, in the rivers, in the lakes, and just say, and now everyone has cell phones, you take a picture and you say, hey, this looks weird. And I can't tell you how many times I've gotten texts or emails, hey, this looks weird. My IT department is always worried about those emails, but I assure them that it's only plants and weird critters in the water. So continue to do that, and that will really help us out. Next slide, please. So here is the mind blower. The one on the left is the bad guy. The one on the right is the good guy or girl. I don't know. I'm not really. Actually, I think these guys are asexually. They break apart into pieces and reproduce. So I'm not sure. But the right side is the native plant. The left side is the non-native. And you can see kind of how robust and how bushy the left side, the hydrilla on the left is. Although in singled out plant, this looks great. It looks like, oh, wow, that a lot of little critters could hide in there and stuff. The problem is that this stuff grows and intertwines with itself and will completely fill the water column from top to bottom up to about 15 to 20 feet deep. So that means like the plant on the right, or even water chestnut, you know how there's that empty water or the space below the surface cover. Hydrilla finds a way. It doesn't need light. It doesn't need as much light because it grabs it from its shoots on the top, and it will fill in the water column. So you lose that volume, and that impacts the river, especially those of you who have been out there during snow melts and flushes. There's less water volume to be taken up in flood stages. There's no place for native plants and animals and organisms to use because this plant is taking up habitat. Next slide, please. All right. So here is what we provide and for the public in references and in classes. The Guide to Aquatic Plants in Massachusetts, that's both native and non-native aquatic plants. We would, teach you guys how to use that. It kind of helps you identify plants that in your normal area where you're boating or swimming or fishing. Understanding Massachusetts Lakes is a book. We like to call it Limnology 101. If you take a lakes class in college, say freshman year, sophomore year, that's this book right here. We've kind of boiled that down. The green guide on the bottom, I like to call it the bad guy book. Everything in there is invasive, non-native. We also have this out. It's waterproof. So I saw in Kelly, I'm very happy. I'm going to have to hit you up for some of those pictures. Those kayaks, those wonderful foldable kayaks that we got you guys, this little green guide can go inside those. And when you guys are paddling around and you see a weird weed, you flip through this waterproof guide and you say, oh, there it is. And then you're able to notify us or CRC. The center sign is a boat sign. I'm hoping all of you have seen these around. It is the law in Massachusetts it's illegal to transport aquatic organisms or vegetation on a boat, trailer, or car from water body to water body. And the EPOs and local harbor masters and police officers are able to enforce it. We have given trainings to the EPOs, and they are very much aware. And that little card is what we usually put under people's windshields. That little card is the same information and explains on how to clean, drain, dry your boat. I know that we want to provide some time for questions. Here's our contacts here, and I know that Amanda will provide this for everyone. Sometimes it's hard to write this down while you're listening to presentations, but and I think Amanda or Kelly, you can nod if we are planning on 8/12/26 is the Weed Watchers training, and the more details will be coming. Next slide, please. I think that might be it. I'm not sure. There you go.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kelly, Toni, and Jim, for all that great information. Like Jim mentioned, we'll launch into our Q&A. The first question that's in the chat, so I'm going to go through questions that are in the chat, and then if folks have questions that they'd like to just ask to the group, you're welcome to raise your hand and unmute. But first question is from Lou. Can you comment on hydrilla treatment efforts with the Army Corps in Connecticut, and especially near that amusement park in Mass?
Well, right now we're in the development stages of coming up with a plan. I don't know if you're familiar with the hydrilla work in the Connecticut River in Connecticut. They've done a ton of different sampling, and they wanted to. The hard thing is flow rates. This is a river. Sometimes it's very much easier to work within a pond because the water doesn't leave as quickly. So right now they are trying benthic matting. They are doing harvesting in areas where amounts are that's just such a large volume, and there is no issue with reintroduction, meaning everything downstream is such a mess already that they're just going to get rid of the volume. And I believe they are trying to do some herbicide testing to see what the efficacy of different quantities or concentrations are. Again, the hard part is it is a river. It's a moving water body system. So if we were to move ahead with the herbiciding or eradication, there's been some other great ideas in that by the amusement park within Connecticut or within Massachusetts. We would have to do some really specific sampling, and we're hoping 26, 27 fiscal year or 27 fiscal year. So that would be the fall of this year or the summer of next to really ramp up. Right now, I want to make sure that we do not have any other hydrilla populations within the tributaries of the Connecticut River. Now, we've hired a vendor in the past to do the entire Connecticut River, and they didn't find anything on, I think it was 65 miles or 68 miles, so double that because they did both banks. They didn't find any hydrilla, a lot of Elodea, but no hydrilla. So now we got to start looking at the tributaries because unfortunately, hydrilla, it could be one little small cove pond that someone dumped an aquarium in 10 years ago that is recontributing to this. And it sounds amazing, like one drop of oil in an ocean, but hydrilla, once it starts growing, once it's broke up, it revegetates. So yeah, we're continuing to work with Army Corps on the Massachusetts portion, but I know they're in full swing down in Connecticut.
Thanks so much, Jim. The next question is from Ron. Are there any biocontrol options available? Who wants to take that one? Kelly.
I can start to speak on that one a little bit. And then, of course, if Toni or Jim, if you have anything to add. Biocontrols are certainly a great option to be looking into. They're a little tricky because they need to be heavily researched before they're kind of applied as an active management, just because you don't want to create potentially another issue where that biocontrol is not quite gelling with the environment, especially if it's not a native environment for them. For water chestnut, I do know there is a native beetle, and I don't know the name right now, that is showing promise on predation on the water chestnut right now. And so I think the research is still out on that. The other thing you have to keep in mind is while you're kind of testing the success of these biocontrols, you still have to apply active management to these aquatic invasive species. You can't just put things on hold just till you get to a point where you feel like, all right, this biocontrol can be actively used, because in the meantime, these species are spreading and building, and you might get to a point where like the biocontrol isn't just going to work anymore. So I would say that biocontrols are definitely something that we're keeping a pulse on, or other folks are that are doing that research. But I feel like most of the biocontrols are still kind of in research mode and not totally in application mode at this point. But Toni or Jim, do you have any thoughts about biocontrols?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with what Kelly said. Every invasive has been researched for biocontrols, and at the federal level, EPA and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, they research it because, I mean, to be ultimately honest, it's usually cheaper for a biocontrol than it is to herbicide or physically manage. The only example I would give that is that Galisarius beetle for purple loosestrife was released here in New England. It worked very well, but not 100%. And if you think about it, that is what no organism would eat itself out of house and home, or it would not evolve. It wouldn't be here. So biocontrols, while they maintain a population or keep it at bay, they don't eliminate it. And no organism, except us, unfortunately, no organism utilizes all of its resources to the point where it doesn't have any more resources because it wouldn't be here. So yes, they work. They're tried some for the Eurasian water milfoil. There were some little little larvae and weevils that way. But like Kelly said, there are other ramifications. What we found is our bluegills, our pumpkin seed, our small fish, loved all of those beetles. So we, at a couple of our testing stations that they did back at DEP, we just fed the panfish really, really well, really expensive biocontrols. So yeah, it's always research. It's always looked into, and but these plants have other. They're located throughout the world, so we go there and we look to see what's keeping them in control.
That's a great segue to our next question, Jim. Joan is curious, what keeps water chestnut and hydrilla in check in Europe?
For water, I can speak a little bit to water chestnut. In Europe, it is probably the native insect parasites that keep it more in check, that are more in the Europe native range. I'm not totally sure what they are, but I'm guessing that's probably what keeps it in check. And it's also just a totally different set of conditions in Europe than it is in here, which can just impact like even small changes in like environmental structure or water temperature or seasonality of that water temperature, or other things that predate on the plant can keep those plants in check. And you just need a couple tweaks in those conditions in a different environment that doesn't have that predation. And it takes a long time for plants and those environmental conditions to kind of balance out, if they ever do. So I would just say the fact that it's on the other side of the world with a whole different set of conditions that keeps it in check from in its native range is what's doing it. I can't really speak to hydrilla and know a little bit less about hydrilla.
The other really big factor is that the 1950s for us was a huge explosion of recreational vehicles. In Europe, traveling from lake to lake or river to river with your own personal boat and your jet ski, and I'm not saying just boats, so I have a boat, so please don't. Our mentality, the American mentality in the 50s was travel and have fun. And that's when we see a lot of these huge populations spread. And the spread vector in Europe or in even Eastern Asia, in Southeast Asia, is just not there. We see that the rivers and stuff have the hydrilla and the water chestnut, but they aren't making the leap to water bodies that don't have them because of that huge influx. And some of the people, or some of the areas like some of the very nice lakes in Switzerland, there's not a commuter boating population. They don't go from one boat to another lake to another lake. They have their boats on that lake, and that's really it. And I'm not saying this was scientifically studied, but this has been discussed by many people that we have the ability to hook our boat up and go. And I say this to Toni and at many of my many of my presentations. I can be in Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, New York, Pennsylvania within a half a day with live viable critters on my boat and trailer in my live well. And so that was a huge boom when people were just traveling around, and then you got to a lake that was a pristine situation, and then all of a sudden there was no other predation there, and bam, these things took off. So there are many factors, but as always, and you're going to hear me say this a lot, it's where we are the main factor. People.
Thank you both. The next question might be a candidate for Jim's Look Weird email category. Anna asks, I have 2 large ponds in the Connecticut River watershed area in Old Lyme, Connecticut. I'm sure my ponds drain toward the mouth of the river and the Sound. There's something feathery in there that wasn't there years ago. Is there someone who can come to my property to help me identify what I have? Colleagues in Connecticut. Kelly, do you know?
Yeah, I think for each state, similar to Massachusetts and Jim and Tony's team. So Connecticut also has a department and a team of folks that do have a way that you can report something weird, right? So I can give Amanda a link to their website and emails to people. So if you're in Connecticut, you can take a photo is probably the best option. So usually if you can get a good photo, somebody can ID it from that. They likely small teams and state offices don't have the ability to come out unless it is something they suspect is invasive and they want to take a closer look at it. Jim also put in the chat iNaturalist with an ID on a photo. So if you're familiar with using iNaturalist, it's kind of a similar way and a different way to report something. And then also you have a community of people who can look at the photo maybe before even the state folks can set their eyes on it and say, yeah, I know what that is. Then you can elevate it if we're thinking it is an invasive. Toni just put in the chat the Massachusetts Department reporting website. And again, I will give Amanda the link to contact Connecticut office folks. So that's the best way, is to go to your state departments if you're seeing something weird, because they all have the resources and usually a way to report things. You can also, I've had people email me photos too. Sometimes I can identify it, or I can just be the person to like contact the state folks to say, hey, I don't know what this is. Do you know what it is? That kind of thing. So that's what I would say, Anna, is look out for that link in the email to report, or you can Google the Connecticut Office of Aquatic Invasive Species to go ahead and report, or find the people to email for that.
Great. We have a few more moments for more questions. If folks have any other questions, just pause. As always, if folks do have questions that pop up at a later moment, I will be sending out an email later today with a bunch of resources and contact information for Jim, Toni, and Kelly, as well as different pieces, and this link to the presentation so you can watch it over if you'd like. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Jim and Toni and Kelly, for putting this presentation together and offering us more information about our watershed. I appreciate all of you for attending today to learn more so you can be a more effective steward of our watershed and its rivers. And we hope to see you next month on Wednesday, May 13th at 12 p.m., same time, same place, for a live stream on stormwater projects. For more information and the registration, it's live on our website at ctriver.org/event. Thanks again, and have a lovely day and happy spring.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.